following program is from NET, the National Educational Television Network.
The people now called Negroes are the most written about and the least understood of the world's people.
This term, Negro, demoralizes us and is detrimental. I feel it doesn't give us any association past the slave ship.
I think that the first task of people of African descent, whether in the United States or in Africa or elsewhere, is to get rid of this slave named Negro.
This curious word Negro was seldom or never used in Africa itself. And this word has no meaning, or no worthwhile meaning at all, in Africa. I would doubt myself if it has any useful meaning anywhere else.
What is a Negro? A simple question, but the answer is not so simple.
No doubt. That's how we do.
Our story begins in the 7th century BCE. The royal house of King David and the tribe of Judah were enslaved by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, after the destruction of the first temple built by King Solomon. In the last episode, Terra Sancta, we extensively covered the migration of the Simri, or the Hebrews, from Babylon to the Iberian Peninsula and the Americas prior to 1492. Don Isaac Aberbanel, a 15th century leader, wrote that Nebuchadnezzar brought Jews to Spain as slaves after the destruction of the first temple. In 409 AD, the Vandals captured the Iberian Peninsula from the failing Roman Empire, and 3 years later the Visigoths conquered it. Under these Germanic Christians, laws were instituted that persecuted the Hebrews. In 587 AD, King Rucair converted to Catholicism, and his declared at the Third Council of Toledo that his kingdom would be officially Catholic. This was a situation that began the downfall of the Jews. The Jews would be the only group that did not join in the religious unity of the country, and this distinction would repeatedly lead to their persecution. For an example, in 612, Visigoth King Sisebut ordered that all Jews submit to baptism within the year or undergo scourging, mutilation, banishment, and confiscation of goods. This resulted in many Jews emigrating. Many of those who remained became Christians outwardly to escape persecution from the Roman Catholics, but continued practicing their faith secretly. We can also tell from history that not all the Jews who remained converted, as evidenced by the number of additional decrees directed against Jews during the 7th through 19th century. However, these decrees were enforced inconsistently, and bribes to the rules helped encourage tolerance of the Jewish citizens, though the situation remained very dangerous for the Jews. Theodor Fritsch asserted that Jews were a Negroid mix. Rudolf Virchow conducted a research project in which skin color was presented not as an objective fact, but rather as something to be intuitively felt. The general consensus, even among Jews, was that Jews were dark. Jews in the liberal arts and poetry of the Weimar period often depicted Jews as dark or black, as in the work of George Gross. The Swiss-French race theorist and anti-Semite George Alexis Montandon perceived the Jews as an ancient cross of Asiatic and Negro. The term Negro has its origins in Romance languages such as French, Spanish, Latin, and Portuguese, and literally means black or dark, but its usage as a description of people dates back to the Spanish and Portuguese, Spanish colonial casta, or caste systems hierarchically categorize Europeans, Aboriginal Americans, African, and mixed race populations in the Americas.
And so a long time ago, he wrote that, there was a kind of medieval perception that Jews were black. And there's plenty of proof that within Europe, the Jews were considered to be kind of black. There are many images of Jews being black, and even if they weren't black, they were not even slightly black, they were kind of considered to be black in one way or another. So blackness and Jews really went hand in hand. If you read his work, or if you read my work, and particularly if you read this new book, you will see the multitude of examples of it. And if you go, for instance, into the marginalia, the illustrations in English or European prayer books in the 13th and 14th centuries, you frequently see hook-nosed Jews wearing Jewish hats and with black faces. So the idea that Jews were black was definitely there, before the Enlightenment period. And
so let's go to the slides now.
Just a sec, because I just need to say, too, in the 19th century, the idea of Jewish blackness was reinforced by the discovery of all of these actual black Jews in India and Africa, all over the place. And by 1850, the main racial theorists of the day started saying that, yes, actually, Jews are Negroes. Negroes, in some way, are also Jews. This is the conflation. It's partly political, it's partly metaphorical, and it's very, very significantly biological.
Before this, one of the oldest usages of the term can be traced back to the 10th century, to a Hebrew by the name of Yahya ibn Yaish, or Yahya the Negro. Born a Portuguese nobleman, he was known as a direct descendant of the Hebrew exilarchs of ancient Babylonia that claimed direct descent from the biblical King David. The compilation of ancient texts known as the Bible also validates this. In the Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verses 5 and 6, it states,
I am black, but comely, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon. Look not upon me, because I am black, because the sun hath looked upon me. My mother's children were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyards. But mine own vineyard have I not kept.
So what do these verses mean? Comely is used here to mean pleasant to look at, attractive, but denotes disagreement, as if to say, if one is to be black, it is contradictory that they are aesthetically appealing. Kedar referred to the darker-skinned people like the Ishmaelites, the Egyptians, Palestinians, and others. The curtains of Solomon likening here is equivocal, since they were very likely purple, the color of royalty in those days. As such, it is agreed upon that she must have intended the more apt tents of Salma in lieu of it, as these were made of black wool. Undeniably, she was referring to the color of her skin in this context and not her heart of sin, as some may like to infer. The reason any of this is important is to gain context on how the earliest usages of the terms Negro and Black were used and what groups those labels were originally applied to. At the turn of the 15th century, we witnessed one of the largest expulsion of Jews following the Alhambra Decree in 1492. This was enacted to eliminate their influence on Spain's large converso population and to ensure its members did not revert to Judaism. Over half of Spain's Jews had converted to Catholicism as a result of the massacre of 1391. Those who did not convert fled to North and West Africa and the Americas. In 1492, we also know Columbus sailed the ocean blue. What we failed to acknowledge is that Spain also decided to expel all Jews from its kingdom. This was the seminal year of the Sephardic diaspora, when Spanish Jews were required to convert to Catholicism or to leave Spain. Much of the population moved on to Portugal, France, and Scotland, or found home in the New World. We must realize that this entire journey rests upon Hebraic foundations. The expedition was conceived and funded and executed by Luis de Santangel, a Jew. The navigation required was designed by Jews. Abraham Zacuto developed astronomical tables, almanacs, and maps, while Levi Ben Gerson is credited with the invention of the sea quadrant, or Jacob's staff, used to guide marine courses. Columbus's first crew included several conversos, or Spanish Jewish converts to Christianity, notably the interpreter Luis Torres. Importantly, 3 conversos in the Spanish court were influential in securing royal approval for the controversial expedition. After the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492, a series of edicts were issued over the next 300 years that resulted in an even larger migration of Jews, or black Europeans, out of their original lands. In 1510, Jews were expelled from Naples. In 1670, Jews were expelled from Vienna by Leopold I. In 1683, Jews were expelled from King Louis XIV's French colonial Caribbean territories. In fact, the growing migration caused so much of an issue, Benjamin Franklin detailed his concerns in his letter, Observations Concerning the Increase of Mankind, written in 1751. In it, he says,
"And since detachments of English from Britain sent to America will have their places at home so soon supplied and increase so largely here, why should the Palatine Boers be suffered to swarm into our settlements and by herding together establish their language and manners to the exclusion of ours? Why should Pennsylvania, founded by the English, become a colony of aliens who will shortly be so numerous as to Germanize us instead of our Anglifying them, and will never adopt our language or customs any more than they can acquire our complexion?" Which leads me to add one remark, that the number of purely white people in the world is proportionably very small. All Africa is black or tawny, Asia chiefly tawny, America, exclusive of the newcomers, wholly so. And in Europe, the Spaniards, Italians, French, Russians, and Swedes are generally of what we call a swarthy complexion, as are the Germans also.
Author Jack Forbes also notes, in the British slave colonies, many people of American ancestry were at times classified as blacks, Negroes, mulattoes, or people of color. The point that Aboriginal Americans were quite commonly called Negroes is very much supported by Portuguese usage. During the colonial period, Brazilian Indians were repeatedly referred to as Negroes or as Negros da Terra, Negroes of the land. A great historical showcase of this is found in the genealogical records of South Carolina. The English settlers who founded Charleston in South Carolina brought with them a tradition of ecclesiastical laws intended to govern a community comprised of and governed by people of English descent. The presence of indigenous Americans in and around the early settlement and the importation of enslaved people forced the early settlers of this colony to amend their legal code to recognize the emerging differences within the community. Between 1691 and 1735, the South Carolina General Assembly ratified a series of laws intended to promote what white legislators described as the better ordering of slaves. Within these slave laws, which borrowed elements from the earlier laws of Antigua, Barbados, and Jamaica, the definition of an enslaved person in South Carolina gradually evolved. Following the Stono Uprising in September 1739, our provincial legislature adopted a comprehensive slave law in the 1740 that lasted, with some modifications, for more than a century. The Negro Act of 1740, as it was commonly called, provided South Carolina's first clear legal definitions of who was and who was not a slave. The provincial and state legislatures continued to create additional laws relating to slaves and slavery over the years, but the definitions of status articulated in 1740 endured with little change. In short, South Carolina's early laws recognized 4 categories or classes of humans. First, in the eyes of the law, were free white men, women, and children of European ancestry. Second, the law recognized free Native Americans living in amity, or in a state of friendship with the government of this colony or state. This means within a recognized or acknowledged tribal situation. The law recognized their right to exist and to live freely, but afforded them few civil rights within the legal framework of the dominant white community. The law expected these free Indians would live separately from the urban and suburban centers of society. Third, the law acknowledged that some free citizens held other humans in a state of legal servitude or bondage. This practice, in the eyes of the law, reduced enslaved people to the status of mere property. As such, they had no discernible legal identity or legal existence beyond their servitude. Fourth, the laws of early South Carolina acknowledged that some non-white people here were not enslaved servants and thus not considered property. The law viewed those people, generally known as free people of color, as valid sui juris or independent members of the community. The law did not recognize them as fully formed citizens, however. The mere facts of their skin color and non-European ancestry created legal disabilities that diminished their civil rights. The term free person of color emerged in the 18th century as a sort of legal shorthand to describe a number of free people from diverse ancestral backgrounds. More technically and specifically, that phrase encompassed three distinct groups of people who are regularly mentioned in South Carolina's early laws: persons classified as free Negroes, persons called free mulattoes, and a third category of free mestizos. The latter term, mestizo, which was borrowed from the Spanish language and has a variety of connotations in other parts of the world, was used in South Carolina to describe people of mixed African and Native American ancestry. Occasionally, one will find the word mestizo spelled musti in 18th century Charleston records. Persons whose genome included African, European, and Native American lineage might have been classified as free mulattoes or free mestizos, depending on their physical appearance. In light of these legal definitions and the colorful vocabulary of early Charleston, one can see that not all free people of color were black. In fact, some insisted in no uncertain terms that they were not black. Witness the existence of the Brown Fellowship Society of Charleston, whose members differentiated themselves from their darker-skinned brethren who formed separate clubs such as the Humane Brotherhood and the Friendly Moralist Society. Modern historians often use the term free black as a convenient and comprehensive label for the diverse population of free, non-white people. But that phrase is not without its own issues. Most everyone in our society today feels uncomfortable with the historical terms colored, mulatto, and mestizo, so historians and citizens alike continue to struggle to find the most acceptable and appropriate vocabulary to describe this complicated subject. In closing, the Black-Jewish-Indian intersections are ripe with cultural significance, social relevance, and pivotal touchstones of our collective history, yet these narratives often remain hidden, untold, and for some reason, obscure on multiple levels and especially in our educational systems. By neglecting to include the rich narratives of Black Indian historical figures like John Horse, Crispus Attucks, and Mildred Loving, we actively participating in the erasure of the ethnogenesis of the Black man.